The year is 1944. The place is Lubang Island in the Philippines. The situation for the Japanese Empire is grim. Allied forces are closing in, and the Japanese army is retreating. A young 22-year-old intelligence officer named Hiroo Onoda is sent to the island with a very specific, very dangerous mission. His commander looks him in the eye and gives him a final order. You are absolutely forbidden to die by your own hand. It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we'll come back for you. Until then, so long as you have even one soldier, you must continue to lead them. You are to sabotage the enemy and never surrender. Onoda bowed. He took those words as an absolute truth. He disappeared into the thick, humid, and dangerous jungle of Lubang. But then, in 1945, the atomic bombs fell. Japan surrendered. The world celebrated. The greatest war in human history was over. But for Hiroo Onoda, the war was just beginning. He didn't hear the news. He didn't see the signatures. For him, the jungle was still a battlefield, and every shadow was an enemy. He would stay in that jungle for the next 29 years. This is the story of the man who became a ghost of the past, fighting a war that no longer existed. The Order of No Return. Hiroo Onoda was trained in guerrilla warfare, a type of fighting very different from regular battles. He was taught not to stand in open lines or charge at the enemy. Instead, he learned to hide in the jungle, strike suddenly, and disappear without being seen. His training focused on patience, survival, and absolute discipline. Onoda was taught that the mission came before everything else. Food, rest, comfort, even his own life were considered less important than orders. Soldiers like him were trained to endure hunger, sickness, and fear without giving up. Quitting was not an option. Before being sent out, his superiors gave him a clear command: "We will come back for you." Onoda believed this completely. He trusted his officers and the Imperial Army with every part of himself. To him, their word was unbreakable. Because of this belief, surrender was not just defeat. It felt like betrayal. In Onoda's mind, giving up would mean breaking a sacred promise and dishonoring everything he had been trained to stand for. As long as he believed the mission was still active, he believed he had no right to stop, even if it meant waiting forever. The first leaflets, 1945. In late 1945, World War II came to an end. Japan had surrendered, and the fighting was officially over. To bring the remaining Japanese soldiers out of remote jungles and mountains, the Allied forces dropped thousands of leaflets from airplanes. These papers carried a clear message. The war ended on August 15. Come down from the mountains. Onoda and his 3 companions found these leaflets in the jungle. They picked them up, read them carefully, and discussed what they might mean. At first glance, the message seemed simple. But to them, something felt wrong. The wording didn't sound exactly like official Japanese military language. The tone felt unfamiliar. Their training had taught them to distrust anything coming from the enemy. Guerrilla soldiers were warned again and again that the enemy would use lies, fake messages, and psychological tricks to force them to surrender. Because of this, the group convinced themselves that the leaflets were a trap designed by the Americans. After talking it over, they made their decision. They threw the leaflets away and returned to hiding. In their minds, the war was still going on. Believing the message would have meant doubting their orders, and they were not ready to do that. Survival in the green hell. Living in the jungle was nothing like an adventure or a camping trip. For Hiroo Onoda and his men, it was a daily fight just to stay alive. The heat was heavy, the air was wet, and danger seemed to come from everywhere. Rain could fall non-stop for weeks, soaking their clothes, their food, and their weapons. They survived by stealing what they could. Sometimes they killed cows from nearby farms. Other times, they lived on bananas, coconuts, and wild plants. Food was never guaranteed. Hunger was a normal part of life. Giant insects bit and crawled over them, and many suffered from painful skin infections that never fully healed. The jungle itself felt like an enemy. Mud slowed them down. Diseases weakened their bodies. At the same time, they had to stay alert for soldiers searching for them. To avoid being captured, they moved their camp again and again, never staying in one place for too long. Even in these harsh conditions, they stayed disciplined. They cleaned their rifles, followed routines, and refused to give up. What kept them going was a single belief they repeated to each other over and over. The Japanese army is still fighting somewhere, we just have to wait. That thought gave them purpose and trapped them in the jungle for years. The search parties, 1950s. As the years passed, the fighting had long ended, but the jungle still hid a few remaining soldiers. The Philippine government slowly realized that there were still Japanese holdouts, ghosts from the war living deep in the forests. In the 1950s, search parties were sent out to find them and convince them to surrender peacefully. One of those men was Hiroo Onoda. To reach him, officials tried something personal. They brought his own brother to the island. Using a loudspeaker, his brother called out to him by name, begging him to come home and telling him the war was over. Onoda heard the voice. He also saw family photographs dropped from airplanes, pictures meant to prove that the messages were real. But his mind was still locked in war mode. Years of training had taught him that the enemy would use tricks, fake messages, and even captured relatives to force surrender. Instead of believing what he saw and heard, Onoda convinced himself it was all a lie. He believed his brother was a prisoner of war being forced to speak. He thought the photographs were clever fakes made by the enemy. Trusting them would mean breaking his orders. So he stayed hidden, choosing duty over evidence, and the war continued in his mind. The group shrinks. Hiroo Onoda did not begin his mission alone. When he first disappeared into the jungle, he was joined by 3 other Japanese soldiers. Together, they shared food, guarded each other, and reinforced their belief that the war was still ongoing. But the jungle is unforgiving, and over time, it broke the group apart. In 1949, the pressure became too much for Yuichi Akatsu. After years of hiding, hunger, and fear, he could no longer endure the life they were living. One day, he quietly left the group and walked out of the jungle to surrender. For Onoda, this felt like a betrayal, but it also meant the group was now smaller and more isolated. In 1954, another soldier was killed during a brief gunfight with a local search party. The danger was no longer just nature, it was people. The jungle that once hid them now exposed them. By 1972, only one companion remained, Shoichi Kazuka. While carrying out what they believed was a wartime mission, burning a rice pile, Kazuka was shot and killed by local authorities. After 27 years of waiting, fighting, and surviving, Hiroo Onoda was finally alone. The war that no longer existed had taken everyone else from him, leaving him as the last soldier in a conflict that had ended decades earlier. The modern world passes him by. While Onoda was cleaning his 1940s rifle, the world was changing. Color TV was invented. Humans landed on the moon. The Beatles became famous and broke up. Computers were being built. But Onoda knew nothing of this. He lived in a world of shadows, mud, and survival. He was a 1944 man living in a 1970s world, unaware that the country he was fighting for had become one of the most peaceful and wealthy nations on Earth. History raced forward while he stood completely still. Decades of progress passed like silent ghosts around him. His war continued long after the world had moved on. The young explorer, Norio Suzuki. In 1974, a young Japanese man named Norio Suzuki decided he wanted to travel the world. He told his friends he wanted to find 3 things: a panda, the Yeti, and Lieutenant Onoda. Most people laughed, but Suzuki went to Lubang Island and hiked deep into the jungle where everyone else was afraid to go. He did the one thing no one else thought to do. He called out Onoda's name like a friend, not a soldier. Curiosity pushed him where fear stopped others. He believed legends were still alive somewhere. Sometimes, history only listens to a human voice. The encounter. Onoda emerged from the bushes, pointing his rifle at the young man. Suzuki didn't run. He sat down and said, "The Emperor and the people of Japan are worried about you." Onoda was shocked to see a Japanese person dressed in modern clothes. They sat together all night and talked. Suzuki told him the war had been over for a lifetime. But Onoda was stubborn. He said, "I cannot surrender. I am a soldier. I must wait for orders from my commander." Time seemed frozen between 2 different eras. One man carried the past, the other carried the present. Trust slowly replaced fear in the quiet jungle night. The return of the commander. Suzuki flew back to Japan and found Onoda's old commander, Major Taniguchi, who was now an old man working in a bookstore. They flew him to Lubang. On March 9, 1974, in a small clearing in the jungle, the old major wore his military uniform and read the official surrender orders to Onoda. Finally, the spell was broken. Onoda saluted, began to cry, and handed over his sword. The war was finally, truly over. A command delayed by decades finally reached its soldier. Loyalty turned into tears of release. In that moment, history quietly closed a long chapter. The tragic hero's return. When Onoda returned to Japan, he was a national hero. Millions of people watched him on TV, but he was miserable. He didn't recognize Japan. He hated the tall buildings, the pollution, and the fact that young people didn't have the same spirit he had. He eventually moved to a ranch in Brazil to find peace in nature. He had survived the jungle, but he struggled to survive the modern world. The world he had protected no longer felt like home. The values he lived for seemed forgotten with time. Fame couldn't replace the simplicity he once knew. In the end, solitude felt safer than applause. Hiroo Onoda died in 2014 at the age of 91. He had spent nearly 1/3 of his life fighting a war that didn't exist. His story is a powerful example of what happens when loyalty goes too far. On one hand, he was a man of incredible strength and discipline. He did what he was told for 29 years without ever giving up. On the other hand, His refusal to see the truth led to the deaths of innocent local villagers and the loss of his own friends. It leaves us with a haunting question. Is loyalty a virtue if it makes you blind to the truth? Onoda was a hero to some and a tragic figure to others. He was the last soldier of a dead empire, a man who lived a life of total sacrifice for a cause that had already vanished into the clouds of history. What would you do if the world changed and you were the only one left who remembered the old way? Would you surrender, or would you keep fighting in the jungle? Do you think Onoda was a hero or just someone who was brainwashed? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. If you want to hear more stories about the strange and secret corners of history, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't let the past be forgotten.